Thanks. Damon Herbst here, and pleased to be here to talk with you guys today. I'm going to quickly give you a Cerner overview. I'm sure a lot of people in the room don't know who Cerner is. We're going to talk through our journey, kind of where we were, where we're at now, and then Chad's going to come up and talk about how we got there. Kind of the change management, the process, the tooling for how we rolled this out across our organization. Okay. Like I said, if you're not in the healthcare industry, you probably don't know who Cerner is. But if you've been to the hospital, if you've been to your primary care provider, there's a good chance that Cerner was involved in that care delivery process. It could have been registering you as a patient at the time of being admitted. It could have been providing the electronic medical record that the clinician was interacting with when they were doing their assessment of you. It could have been the fact that we were running data centers that was hosting our client solutions for over 85% of our clients. We run and maintain our own data centers. So with that being said, in short, we are a healthcare software company and IT service provider. We have about 28,000 associates today. About 5,000 of those are engineers. So when we talk about a rollout, this is a big rollout across the organization. Okay, let's talk about our technologies. We have a variety of different technologies out there. When you've been in business for over 30 years, you start to pick up technologies. They're like Christmas gifts. You get them every year. They accumulate. We have a lot of legacy systems out there, but we also try and embrace and adapt to the new languages that are coming out. You can see a lot of new stuff up here. We also want to be able to adapt to the new deployment runtimes that are available. We have solutions, mobile solutions for our clinicians and consumers. So you see Android and iOS. We do a lot of web and browser development in Ruby, JavaScript with React.js. We have numerous queuing and brokering systems that we use today, ranging from Kafka to RabbitMQ to IBM MQ. We write our services, microservices in Java. We have databases that range from MySQL to Oracle. And then we've been embracing the containerization movement and using a container orchestration system. Okay, let's kind of talk about where we were. So prior to having New Relic, we would custom instrument our code. And what that meant is, we were actually literally going in there and doing start timers in our code and stop timers. That was really error prone for us. Does anybody know what a runaway timer is? Well, we had a lot of runaway timers because there were some cases where we weren't stopping the timers. It became very confusing, when we were getting information back and we saw these long times, and we had to go back and try and, correct that. Also, when there was an issue, first we had to hope that the whole phone home system was working, that the timers were actually being collected by the centralized system. And then when we got in there, the timers were at such a high level that we typically had a lot more questions in the end than we did answers, because there's thousands of lines of code that were being executed underneath that timer and you had no idea where to look. And then we had to try and add more timers and you typically never got it right. Also, we had to try and fill the gaps in our technology stack. So we were building custom monitoring components. These were cumbersome to maintain and keep up to date. And we were spending engineering time doing that, and it was taken away from our core competency, which is building healthcare solutions, not monitoring solutions. So I like the example in the word toil. We were doing a lot of toil to try and keep up our monitoring. So that's a new word I'm going to use in my vocabulary to describe what we did in the past. Splunk. So we were using Splunk and Elasticsearch for our alerting and monitoring. They're great log aggregation tools. We know the importance of logging, but it shouldn't be your first line of defense. And it was often for us. We had a small number of dashboards too. I can code, but I'll tell you what, when I look and try and create a Splunk dashboard and what goes behind that, it takes a special talent that unfortunately I just don't have, or I don't have the patience for. So we had to, it doesn't really encourage people to go out and build dashboards. And then lastly, we're very reactive to our clients. They would typically call us and tell us there was a problem, and then we would dig in, which is not where we need to be. So we still had a lot of blind spots. The dependencies in our system were often looked at as black boxes. Our support organization didn't understand all the dependencies, and a lot of our less seasoned engineers didn't really fully understand all the dependencies of the system. And as I told you before, what we were doing was kind of extremely inefficient. So I don't know if this sounds familiar to anybody else in the room. Maybe it's only specific to Cerner, but I doubt it. So let's talk about where we are now. So we owed our clients something better than what we were doing. We owed it to ourselves to be better than what we were doing. We really needed to be world-class when it came to monitoring and observability. So let me tell you a little story. A few years back, actually, I was out doing some technical due diligence with a small startup that we were going to be partnering with. And I was asking them questions about their tools and processes. And I said, what do you guys do for monitoring? And they said, oh, well, check this out. They pulled up this dashboard that showed error rates and timing and throughput. It's like, what is this? They're like, oh yeah, it's New Relic. This is great. I'm like, this is great. So one of the first things I did when I came back to Cerner was become a champion for APM and especially New Relic to get that installed at Cerner. So we began our rollout in 2017. We have the whole suite of solutions. As you saw by our technologies, we need really all that suite of solutions that New Relic provides. And it provided immediate value, and it's used daily by our engineers. We use it in development, we use it at time of deployment, and we use it for production monitoring and continuous improvement. Just an example from development. Here last week, we were actually using the new distributed trace capability. We had a solution in development that was taking about 7 seconds to load, and they turned on distributed trace and understood that they were calling out to an external service to them. It was still kind of within the platform, and using a very inefficient API to do that. And worked with the team, they changed it around. They changed that 7-second load time down to 1 second. And that was all because of what New Relic provided from the distributed tracing. So extremely powerful. Really, right after we rolled it out too, we had an incident in production where our SAN was saturated for one of our tenants. I will be honest with you, I think it probably would have taken us 3 hours with the old way to kind of get to root cause of what was going on. We were able to pinpoint it within 20 minutes using New Relic. So huge MTTR advantages there. So we still use Splunk and Elasticsearch. Again, logging is extremely important, but we've been able to complement the two technologies together. We actually added some custom instrumentation in New Relic, and we have our own correlation IDs that then get stamped on the transactions in Splunk, and we can join the data together, and it tells the full picture of what we want to see. And we now have a large number of dashboards. Even I can create a New Relic dashboard. It is super simple, provides a lot of value. And our engineers, again, look at it daily to understand how we're progressing in production. And we're very proactive now. We are contacting the clients ahead of them calling us, which is huge. We're also seeing little anomalies in the data that haven't quite bubbled up, to fully impact all the end users, and we're able to change that before it becomes a bigger problem. So it's really helped change our culture of how we run and maintain things. So I'm going to turn it over to Chad, and he's going to talk about how we kind of got to this point, what the tools and processes and change management was around that. Thanks.
Thanks, Damon. Again, my name's Chad Hayes. I'm Associate Principal Engineer at Cerner, and happy to be here and share, as Damon said, how we got to the point where we are today. So this is kind of the practical portion of the talk. So if you like kind of specific implementation steps, or you're kind of a brass tacks person, this would be the time to get your notebook out and get your camera out and take pictures, because I'm going to walk you through what we've done to roll out New Relic across our organization. As Damon said, we have a very large development organization of 5,000 plus engineers. And so, it's not like we can just walk down the hall and say, hey, we're using this new Relic tool, and everybody's like, great, yeah, we're on board. We have to be able to communicate that out and provide some structure and some governance around the methodology in which you roll it out and some conventions. And so I'll walk through those steps. So just a quick note here, we're obviously at a New Relic sponsored conference, and we'll be talking specific about New Relic, but kind of the framework and the concepts that I'm going to be walking through could really be applied to any new technology or tool that you want to bring in. So it really is somewhat of a methodology. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. The first one of those things being just raising awareness. So again, large organization, and as Damon said when he came back and introduced New Relic into Cerner, I don't think that was really on anybody's radar. I certainly wasn't tracking on it, and so it was new to hear about, and certainly different from the way we were doing things previously. And quite honestly, we didn't know what it did, what kind of value it provided, but through a lot of demos and kind of one-on-one sessions with smaller groups, we began to verbalize just the power of what it could do. And we kept kind of banging the drum internally to get our executive leadership team on board with the tool, because I think they were skeptical as well. We had been doing kind of our own monitoring for several years, and it was working. But as Damon said, we had some blind spots. So to see something like this was certainly new, and we certainly had to verbalize that. Second thing we did is we created internal groups on our message boards and Slack channels for people who had just heard of the tool for the first time to come and ask questions and say, hey, what is this? What features does it provide? So on and so forth. And then we held some face-to-face observability meetups and demos, like I said. So this gave us a chance to really show firsthand what the tool could do. Show off features. It gave people the opportunity to show what they're doing with the tool within their specific part of our organization. And then finally, we shared success stories across our org. So there may be better ways to do this, but just a very easy thing that we did is we just started building an Excel spreadsheet that has what group was using the tool. So we work in an organization called Careware within Cerner. So we labeled our group, what the situation was, and then ultimately how New Relic helped lower MTTR times, or diagnose an issue, so on and so forth. So it really became kind of that proof point list to go back to our team to say, hey, we need to continue to invest in the tool long term. As I mentioned, we wanted to create standards around New Relic and how we would roll it out across our organizations. And so this has been one of the most popular and I think one of the most used things within our organization. We call it the New Relic Handbook. And basically what it is it's your guide if you're first getting started with New Relic. How do you go use the tool? What sort of conventions and standards have we put in place as an organization for you to follow? So first and foremost, this is sourced in GitHub. So we wanted to treat this just like we would any other code project for the most part. So we don't want people who are just coming to the table for the first time just willy-nilly adding things to this standards book, if you will, and saying, oh, I think we should do this. We want it to be kind of well-defined and have some governance and structure around it. So people will come in and submit pull requests for new things that they'd like to see changed or new way of doing something. And so that provides the community the opportunity to provide feedback through comments. And then once everything's good to go, we pull it in and that becomes part of the standards going forward. And then some of the things that we actually define within the handbook itself are things like account structure and naming. So at Cerner, being a large organization, we follow a master sub-account model. So we have our top-level Cerner master account, and then we have over 100 sub-accounts at this point. And so being able to manage those, know what sub-accounts exist today. So if you're developing a new application, you need to know kind of what account it belongs to. But the account itself will define what the solutions and services are that are in that account, and also provide a naming convention. So what the solution is, where does it reside. Cerner is a global company, so we operate in many countries around the world. So in our accounts, we'll actually put the solution and then postfix it with, is it in the US region, is it in a UK region, Australia, so on and so forth. And then second to that, we have application naming standards, kind of the same thing here, right? So describe what your application is it part of a blue-green stack deployment, and then what region does it reside in, again, US, UK, so on. The third item there is the custom attributes and definitions around those. As Damon mentioned, we kind of started in this single tenant model, and we are making the shift to cloud multi-tenant, and so it probably makes a lot of sense that one of the things that we want to track across our solutions and services is a tenant ID, for example. That's very cross-cutting and something that every solution within our organization should be implementing, so we can track transactions across our tenants and know what tenant those belong to. So we've defined those that we think every team should be implementing, and then certain teams within our organization have kind of subsetted that list or supplemented it with their own custom attributes that they think should be implemented. And this gives anybody who's looking at the code and sees these custom attributes basically an idea of what the attributes represent and how they can be used in the queries that they're creating. Alert policy best practices, I'm going to skip that one for a second because I have another slide here in a minute that's going to talk about what we've done there. But the next one on the list is security considerations. So Cerner is in the healthcare industry, so it's obviously very highly regulated. And so we have to be very cognizant about HIPAA-related concerns, make sure we're not leaking patient information or personally identifiable information. So we take, obviously, security in a very high regard. And we have, again, in the New Relic Handbook, conventions about how to lock down, URL path parameters, for example, to make sure that we're not putting PHI and the path parameters that are getting uploaded to New Relic, make sure our SQL queries are not exposing data that they shouldn't be. So again, this is just stuff that people can refer to as they get into it. Agent configuration and then where and how to get help, those are all found in the handbook as well. So the last thing I'll say here is, I can't count the number of times that people have said, hey, we're getting started with New Relic, and they come to me or Damon and they say, well, what do we do? How do we get onboarded? And the answer is almost always go look at the handbook first, and chances are the answer is going to be in there. From an automation perspective, we want to create reusable assets. So Docker is obviously a very popular technology in the world of software development today. So we have base Docker images basically that include the agents themselves, and any consuming teams that will extend our base Docker image will have the New Relic agents in them. So this is pretty powerful in terms of being able to update our agents. So if we make an update in the core Docker image, then everybody else gets that for free just by updating their image. Obviously, the keys and the config are externalized to the image because we have various sub-accounts, as I mentioned. But again, I think the point here is that we are creating these reusable things for people to consume as part of their development process and get New Relic in there from the get-go. We also utilize chef scripts. There's obviously a number of scripts in the community for laying down infrastructure agents. We've built on top of that some of our own scripting. We have some custom integrations that we've written, and so obviously our chef scripts will install those on our on-premise nodes as needed. Okay, so I mentioned alerts. So if you've spent any time in the New Relic console and done anything with alerting, it's very easy to create powerful alerts. But you also know that it's very easy to change those alerts without warning, and sometimes those things happen, and there's not always a good way to know when those things are changed or why they were changed. And so we, from the get-go, have decided, we want to kind of lock that down, if you will. And so our alert policies are actually controlled and source controlled in GitHub as well. And that just gives us a chance to basically, gives us the opportunity to know exactly what is deployed out there, what are our thresholds for the specific policies that we've configured. And if there's a change that needs to be made over time, we can submit a pull request for that, get buy-in from the community or from whoever needs to bless it and go forward. And we found that to be very, very powerful. We did create an internal utility that will basically read those policy configurations out of GitHub and upload them through the APIs. We're actually kind of looking at Terraform as a replacement. We found that it provides a lot of our services, a lot of those same needs, and so we are actively looking at that as a replacement for our internal tooling. And of course, we've kind of set forth some standards for what elements you want to monitor as part of your policies. So AppDex score, response times, error percentage, throughput, and so on. So tying this back to kind of the SRE concepts, so we have SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs. Oh my. So the point here is there's a lot of acronyms that are being thrown around here, and they're all good things, don't get me wrong, but I'm a simple-minded guy, and so I kind of like to put this in layman's terms. And so this is very much an in-process thing for Cerner at the moment. We've started with the monitoring. We feel like we've got pretty good progress made in getting the agents out there and instrumenting our code. Now we're trying to shift to these SRE concepts. And so it really starts with goals, which are your SLOs. Basically, what is it that you want to measure? Do you want to have a service that is up 98% of the time, 99% of the time? What are your objectives that you want to achieve? And then you obviously have your measurements that track against those objectives, and those are your SLIs. So these are the specific metrics and things that you are watching over time. And then finally, your error budget, which your goals are actually what drive your error budget. If you've spent any time reading the kind of the SRE books that Google has put together, they talk about an error budget in there. And if you don't meet your goals for a period of time, then you have to think about what organizational changes that has, or what impacts it's going to have to your organization. Are you going to stop doing feature work and start fixing things to get your reliability back up to where you need it, or what other actions do you need to take? So another way of looking at this, and this is kind of a loose framework about some of the SRE kind of practices we're implementing. So it starts with your SLIs, which are based on your golden signals. So that's step one up there. If you've read the SRE handbook, Google has defined their golden signals for monitoring, and they've listed 4 of them. And we've decided that ours will really closely align with those, not exactly one-to-one, but closely aligned, because we'll be monitoring AppDex, latency, error rates, and availability. And so, again, we've determined that those are things that every application and solution within Cerner should be monitoring. And then next thing is actually getting your code instrumented. So number 1 and number 2 can kind of go hand in hand. But the point on number 2 there is you want to establish a baseline. Because, right, you want to know where you are today and then where you want to go in the future. Because you can't set a goal unless you really know where you are today. And it's kind of hard, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. And so that's something that we've been doing, and we are in the midst of that. And then I talked about an error budget window. So this is, the way to think of this is just kind of how tight you want your monitoring to be. Do you want to track your goals over a 1-hour period, a 1-day period, or a 1-week period? And those are things you need to think about. And they will change potentially over time, and they're going to be different for every solution. So there's thought that needs to be put into that. Talked about measuring and reporting using the SLIs against those goals, and then finally taking action based on your misses. So again, if you miss your goals, do you just stop your feature development in favor of fixing those? This is just a snapshot of a dashboard that Damon put together, just kind of an SLO variant. So, we have 3 of our golden signals up there, AppDex, error rate, and latency deltas, and these are showing how close we are tracking to our SLOs. So a positive number means we are good, right? We didn't go below our SLO. A negative number means we did go below it, and we need to take some action to course correct. So last thing I'll run through here is just a few dashboards that we've also set up. And to kind of set the stage here, these next set of dashboards are looking at a solution called CareAware Connect. And it's a mobile solution, first of all, that allows clinicians and providers to securely text message each other, place voice calls, and receive real-time alerts from medical devices. So this first dashboard here is basically just looking at the the error codes and response codes that are coming back from our transactions. So we're tracking, number of 200s, number of 500s, so on and so forth. We also break this down by tenant. So as I said, we are working towards a multi-tenant system. And so we are looking at number of errors by tenant. One of the other things that we put together is a network-related dashboard where we actually are tracking errors by tenant, the number of network errors by tenant. So we can actually tell some of our clients, hey, we have this mobile solution deployed in your environment, and we see you're doing 2,000 network errors a day, because that's provided by the new Relic agent out of the box. And so we can actually inform them, hey, let's go look at your network because we're seeing a bunch of these errors. So it kind of goes back to the proactive nature of what Damon talked about earlier. Usage dashboards, this is pretty self-explanatory. In the top left-hand corner there, we have number of unique users a month. So we're doing roughly about 33,000 users, 10,000 unique devices, and across 61 clients, and that number is growing. And then finally, volume dashboards against the system as a whole. So how many transactions are we doing across the board? So these are used by engineering on a daily basis. As Damon mentioned, just gives you a kind of a quick snapshot of how the solution is performing as a whole. I'll also say that we're also influencing some of our business culture too. I get requests, and I'm sure Damon does as well, from our business folks who are wanting to look at these dashboards and gather these metrics so they can share it back out with the client community to say, hey, this solution is live in the field, and we have it at these number of client sites, and we have these many unique users a month. So it's starting to become widely used across not just the engineering community, but also our other business units as well. So that is all I have. Thank you guys very much for attending, and we'll open it up for questions.